Let me open the floor for question. Be very brief, be very concise, and identify yourself. Please.
Good morning. This is Yong No from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And fortunately, these 2 days we have not heard any voice from China. But fortunately, for these years, I've been working with most of these guys to the podium. I have 2 comments rather than questions. And for the title for the session is developing the international approach for science advances. I've been working with all those organizations. I found that the more competitions than collaborations among those organizations. And so I think that we have discussed many of the things, the same things, in the different organizations, right? So I suggest we need to really create the mechanism to consolidate the collaborations among these organizations. If we want our science advance to be heard by UN, by national organizations. And the second, I think it's very, very important to get the needing countries involved, right? This is true, whether you agree or not, right? And we have to, have voices from different countries and to be heard. And I also suggest that as a member of TWAS, and I think that TWAS should play a more important role to get the voice from developing countries. And I just give one example, and John mentioned about inter-academy panels. In my personal experience, a more powerful, effective policy report given not by those organizations, the podium, frankly speaking, sorry for that, and given by G-Science, right, G8 plus X, whatever academies, because those consist of major needing academies, and those titles given by the government, right, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by Ministry of whatever hosting countries, yes. So it's very, very important to get this kind of collaborations among the ministries, among the government, and among the academies. This is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me go here.
Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Mike Ives. I'm a reporter based in Hanoi, and I'm reporting at this conference for SciDev.net. I have 2 questions, if you wouldn't mind, really quick. The first is, Mr. Wilson of ICSU said yesterday that the organization is seeking to broaden its agenda beyond the environmental domain into things like urban public health and disaster risk management. So my question is, how will that affect scientists in the developing world in general? Second question for Mr. Boatwright and others about science diplomacy. President Obama spoke about this in 2009. It's been a big goal of the administration, but obviously it's hit some roadblocks along the way. Could you assess how successful U.S. science diplomacy has been in the Obama administration? And in general, is science diplomacy improving or deteriorating in the
Thank
world?
you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Steve, very briefly.
So very briefly on the question of broadening our programs. As I said yesterday, ICSU has a very broad membership, 121 countries, reflecting 141 countries and regions, and particularly through our regional offices, which are based in Africa, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America. We work to ensure that the agendas for our new programs and the themes for our new programs themselves are very heavily influenced by scientists from all parts of the world, from the least developed countries, from the developed countries, and from the developing countries. And so what we expect with programs like Future Earth, with programs like Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, with the Urban Health Program, is that scientists from all parts of the world are involved in setting those agendas. They're working with those stakeholders so that all parts of the world can benefit from them. And we see that very much, particularly in the programs on disaster risk and on the new program on urban health.
Thank you. John?
The short story is science diplomacy is a very powerful idea. It hit a real chord. The quality of the, I think it's 9 science envoys that have been sent was very high. It was the White House and State Department very much looked to the science community to identify really top-level people. The welcome and the openness was remarkable. And the challenge now is to follow it up, do more to follow up the good ideas that are generated on those. It's a continuing program. I personally think with modest resources we could get much greater benefit out of it, and I think that'll happen. But there is a question of expectations.
Why don't I let the questions come in first, and then I'll let the panelists to respond. Let's have you over here.
So, David Mayer from the JRC. With such a distinguished panel of practitioners, I have a question which I hope each of you can share your experience. I think we all accept the primacy of politics and democracy over science in decision making. But I guess our ambitions in this room are not limited to simply giving advice. We actually want the people to take the advice. So, in your experience, what is the reason that you have encountered, the most important reason why politicians and policymakers have not taken your advice?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, over here.
So I'm Jeff Garrett. I'm the Queensland Chief Scientist and formerly Chief Executive of the National Science Agency on Australia, it's CSIRO. And taking the imprimatur from Sir Peter, that some of the comments that were yesterday can also be addressed in this panel, and just talking about relationships, trust and communication, just two quick comments. The panel, one of the panelists said yesterday that the problem with many of the perceptions of politicians is that when scientists come, they're just here to lobby and asking for money for more research. I was reminded in a conversation last evening with one of my old colleagues that my first experience meeting the Treasurer in Australia, at that stage Peter Costello, his comment was that you expletive research institutions and universities are just like little birds in a nest. All you've got is your mouths open all the time. So I think that's an issue. David Mayer commented rightly yesterday that in 9 out of 10 of the people he brought to the Prime Minister, there was no empathy. I think Sir Mark also had some wise comments. That our key role in building relationships and trust is to listen more. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People leader, writer Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand, then be understood. So that's point 1. Point 2, relatedly, in the communication business, we heard a lot about communication. We do it very badly. I was just reading again last evening, I'm on a panel for adjudication of significant funding raised from philanthropy for cancer research. The panel, I'm the token techie, the panel are lay people. The request was describe your research in layperson's terms in a maximum of 150 words. It started, the first one, and the others were the same. Members of the F family of proteins are important during fetal development, along with their membrane-bound F-rin ligands, etc., etc. I'm also reading a very interesting book by a guy called Geronimus Karloff, that's not his real name, called Critical Mass, which is a novel about science. And in his foreword he says, and this is very important I think, the dominant incentives in the world of the intellect have tended for hundreds, if not thousands of years, to encourage intelligent people to complicate their communications. When any intellectual argument seems abstract and difficult to comprehend, it is customary in the academic milieu to presume that its exponent must be necessarily brilliant. On the other hand, when an intellectual argument seems simple and easily understood, it is usually assumed to be facile. This is why the intellectual authors tend to write books that nobody will understand, and while intellectual readers tend to read books that nobody enjoys reading. So, I also think we need to be really creative about how we communicate. We are obviously, climate change is critical to much of our work. I was reading recently an elegant article by University of Queensland John Cook and my old colleague at CSIRO John Church. They're thermodynamicists, they've done heat balances, and when you start talking about joules or petajoules or megajoules, people's eyes glaze over. But what they calculated is that the heat absorbed by the Earth, 90% of it by the oceans, each second is equivalent to 4 Hiroshima bombs going off. equivalent to 345,600 Hiroshima bombs going off every day, or the world's stockpile of nuclear weapons, currently 24,600 or thereabouts, going off, that amount of heat being absorbed each day. Then people say, wow, that's a lot of heat. So I think we really need to think elegantly about how we communicate. One of my final comment, one of my
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I got to sort out the technology. There we go. Failed test one. I'm Denzel Miller from Tasmania. I'm the science advisor there. I suppose I've got two unashamedly utopian observations to offer to the group in general within this section, developing an international approach. I think the first thing is I've learnt from this is that we are not alone. Each individual scientific advisor, wherever you come from, you are not alone. There's a world of mentoring, there's a world of experience to which events like this, CS World, Chief Scientist World, which you've seen out on the desk, they expose us to that, the European Science Advisors Network. And the question I ask myself, well, how do we operationalize this globally? How do we make that kind of capability work? And to me, I think there's probably some cause to think about an international science advisors network. Obviously, as Chris Whitley would say, you've got to make sure it's low budget. It's got to be broad, it's got to be low cost, it's got to be high impact. Well, you know, let's have a look at the Twitter feeds after this. What have they, after this event, what have they achieved? And I think to put it all in perspective, what we need to be dealing with is we need to be collaborative, competitive, and we need to integrate far more. And I think that that's the one lot message. The second message and the second question I ask myself is, what do I do as an individual advisor? What do I do? And I think, again, very simply, we've talked about the capacity to know things, and we've talked about the capability to do things and to improve that, particularly in the developing world. And I think Roman put his finger on it when he said we need to get to the place where science is recognized as being for all, and the culture of science is assumed by all. And I think the important thing there that I would offer is a science capability framework, the development of that. And it's got some key benchmarks that we can work towards in capacity and capability development. And again, the soundbite from that is think local and act global. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm closing the list now. The gentleman and lady over here and Professor Omar from over here. Please, sir.
Yeah, John Troughton, the Agribusiness Council of Australia. Pavel, just a comment, Pavel, brilliant. Thank you very much. You've shown us a way forward. I want to ask Jacqueline, though, in terms of us as just a little organisation, forming a partnership with your organisation, what is the process to do it?
Thank you, Professor Omar.
Well, Omar is my name, a retired science advisor from Malaysia. I'm refraining from using the word former because that may have different connotations. Yesterday, we heard from Finland about not getting heard on the European platform. The same fate befalls developing countries in international forum. And here, yesterday and day before, we learned a lot about the science advice and science diplomacy, science policy of the developed world. And we have heard very little about the concerns in the same area of the developing world. And the issues are different. And Romain give us a taste of that difference. Now, the issues are different in terms of scope. I tend to call the issues of the developing world as more basic need-based issues, and even management and organization and management structures, as different from the thematic evidence-based issues of concern to the developing world. Now, one of the aspects of international science advice would be the assistance or the aid to developing countries to help them build capacity in science advice and science policy. Now, in respect to aid, I am reminded of a book recently published by Oxford University called Aid on the Edge of Chaos. And this book makes a case for the propensity of aid agencies in providing prescriptive best practice solutions. And this is likened to a disease which is called best practicitis. Now, be careful about catching not just Ebola, but best practicitis. Because when we are dealing with international aid in science advice, we need to be rather relevant to the need of the countries concerned. What has that got to do with this meeting? I think when this meeting is next convened, I would request Sir Peter to consider a special session on the issues of science advice and science policies of the developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The last speaker, the lady.
I'm Catherine Herbert. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Auckland with a keen interest in science policy. My question is for Jacqueline McLeod. It's very closely related to what the previous question was, and it's when you are part of a big organisation like UNEP, how are you sensitive to the issues of developing countries when you're, for example, their energy need and also their contribution to climate change when looking at big global policy? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me give each of these panelists 1 minute, and starting from Pavel.
Is that it? Okay? Does it work? Okay. Let's see if I manage 4 minutes. So time moves now, right? Okay. The question, we want to see advice taken rather than given. Two things which I would like to put on the table again. I think the partnership issue. We are leaving the scene too early. Scientists publishing paper, I used to leave the scene when it was published, fine. Now I am further. I'm actually in that policy advice. But after I give to Ban Ki-moon my report, I have no way to go and to be with him until implementation. I think we should stay on scene until the last minute, until we go to the country, talk about this implementation. This energy assessment, big success. It was taken, SC for all. Now there are pledges of 500 billion. Chad Holiday leads the group. And science is out. And we are afraid because meanwhile shale gas came and we do not know what the scenarios are. So we should be staying on the business until the end. Second is communication. Let me give you a little story. I was privileged to be on the Dutch Prime Minister Special Committee, Delta Committee, which was designed to put up 100 years ahead the policy in infrastructure in the Netherlands. And we did it, and we were successful. And in the end, we had a report which was adopted by Dutch government as a plan, which will be costing 2 billion a year, additional 100 years. I was the one who was presenting this to the parliament. And we have in Netherlands a new party, which is called Conservative Party, Populistic Party, Mr. Wilders. And when I said we are going to invest 2 billion a year, he said, Professor Kabas, would you stand up, please? You must be mad. You must be mad. In front of 150 parliamentarians. And I said, Mr. Wilders, do you own the house? He said, yes. What is it worth? He said, €500,000, something about it. I said, did you insure your house against fire, against everything? He said, yes. How much do you pay for that? He said, about 5% of my income. Then I asked him, do you know how much 2 billion a year is of what we are earning altogether in Netherlands every year? It's 0.02%. Communication, make it personal, make it feeling, make it emotional. That's the way I think we should be thinking. Open up to this communication because that's very, very important thing.
Thank you, Pavel. Jacqueline?
Thank you. There aren't many successes about translation of science into policy where it really happens. I think that's half of my dilemma. But I'll point to one, air quality. So when I was working in the European Environment Agency, we produced more science than you can imagine to prove the case. But sitting with the commissioner, Mr. Potočnik, he just said to me, you know, once we open the book and we start to look at revising the air quality directives, we could have the opposite because so many countries don't want to spend money on air quality and energy and transport that we could end up with a worse solution. So it strikes me that even when you've got the very best science, you just need very brave politicians as well. And what do? They want to see you standing right here at their shoulder. They want to see you there right from the beginning through the terrible debates. They want you to be innovative at the moment when they look around and say, so what is the number? because politicians are always criticised for plucking numbers out of the air. Actually, they don't. They've got somebody around giving that number. So we just have to be there all the time. And whether it's the real, the scientist from the lab or the person in between, the chief scientific advisor, you need to be kind of shadowing and being there through all of the rough waters. So trust, building that relationship long before it gets to be an emergency, and watching the political debate so you know what's coming up. So I just end with one thing. There are lots of emerging issues, but we have a lot of scientists who cannot, in a sense, sustain their careers because they published the one unpopular paper that went in the face of what I would say the dogma. And so I think another job of the chief scientific advisors is to take care that early warning scientists aren't trampled on too early, to protect those kinds of people who are giving unpleasant messages that this whole body of knowledge, in fact, is the wrong paradigm and we should be over here. So I think we have to be listening a lot more. We have to be helping young scientists. But at the end of the day, our job is to stick there against everything. And, there's nothing bad about recycling science, because scientific endeavors get published, and as you say, people tend to walk away because we did that one, and there's an anathema about, publishing it again. You have to tell the message again and again and again and again. So peer-reviewed literature, great, but repeating it again and again in many different domains, that is an industry in its own right. And again, it's kind of like second-hand science. But it's the thing that gets the car on the road, it's the thing that gets the science on the road. So we're just second-hand car salesmen, I'm sorry to say, but that's probably what we are.
Thank you. Thank you. John?
I guess everybody's favorite question was the why isn't science advice taken? So just a couple of things. One, some of it is, and we should learn from that. And let's look at the successes. Some of them are in the air, some are tobacco, some are ozone depletion, and so on. They're dramatic and they're important, and we learn something from it. Secondly, I think already it's been eloquently answered that a lot of it is about communication. But thirdly, and this is tough because I think that there's serious polling in the US and in other countries that we actually don't do all that badly with the people themselves. The problem is the translation in the political process and the timescales involved in the careers and so on that make it, and the special interests that are pouring resources into it. And those are the complicating factors, and it's really tough.
Thank you. Ramin.
So I could have chosen to speak about science advice on the African continent, about the African Union, and the Ministerial Conference on Science Technology for Ministers, where I was involved in, and that continue. At the continental level, there are things that are being done. Same, I could have also spoken about science in the developing world here in general. TWAS has 5 regional offices in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Nairobi, at the Library of Alexandria, in Bangalore, in Beijing, and at the Brazilian Academy of Science. We have 5 regional offices where we work on this. I could have done that, but I chose to speak about the example of a small country, Rwanda, where I was involved, where science was considered to be very important, and how we came about it in writing down the policy and linking out with international advice, which is very, very important. When we talk about big data, this means there is a whole of information there. There are many people who want to help. So if you really want to build your scientific capacity, there are many things you can do, and you can seek for advice, for outside advice, and that's the thing that is very, very important.
Thank you.
If you allow me for another, yesterday somebody said that, or the day before, that Africa was not represented. Africa was invited. The person who was supposed to come and speak, he didn't speak. I don't mention also names, because also I remember we have invited some other people from other countries. So they didn't come, or they didn't respond. So we cannot carry them on the back and say we bring them you here to speak. So there are many situations where we cannot. The most important here is because you are here already. You are giving your opinion on that. And then I'm sure in the future there will be possibility to be able to organize forum on science and aid, and then see how really, and focus really in developing countries. So I'd like to just stop here.
Thank you very much. Stephen, 30 seconds.
Very briefly, back to the question about advice not taken up. For me, advice too late, answering the wrong question, not sufficiently engaged. All of those, that's why co-design is very much in our mind. But also, responses that are not sufficiently broad, so they look too much at one particular component of a problem, but don't provide an advisor with the interdisciplinary knowledge that they need to be able to respond to all the factors involved, especially the social factors.
Thank you very much. Carlos, take all the time you need.
Thank you. Again, on the question of why advice is not taken up, from my own perspective, in addition to what has been said here, but I would like also to stress that the science advisors have to be persistent, because science does not change from one year to another. It improves. We have more certainty. So if you are, my own experience in a few years, if you are persistent, if you're there, if the science advice is there, eventually it will slowly sink in, and eventually, even if this political situation does not take it, but the next one will take it. So we have to be really persistent, and also it means that science advisory has to be a very strong and permanent process, not only depending on a particular personality, although a personality is important in some situations, but it has to be a permanent process.
Thank you. Peter Gluckman, I fail you. I promised to end at 11:15. It's now 15 minutes behind time. I know the rapporteurs are taking down notes. All I need to do now is to request me to join in thanking the brilliant panelists today. Thank you very much.